morning. Today in our class, we are going to apply some of the skills that we have worked on the past few weeks with reading more carefully to a completely different kind of text. So far, we have looked at newspaper articles, we have looked at essays, we have looked at blog posts, we have looked at internet articles, and we have determined meaning, and we've tried to understand what's going on and the messages that are there. And so today, though, we are going to take a look at a completely different kind of text that we can apply those same skills to and derive meaning from it. So what we're going to talk about today is a poem. Now, tell me, what is your exposure to poetry? How do you feel about poems? If I'm hearing you right, most of you are a little leery of poetry. It seems a little unfamiliar. It's maybe a little odd. We don't always understand what's going on. It's kind of old-fashioned. That's a few of the things that I'm hearing from you. And so my question to you, though, is when was the last time you read a poem? Or when was the last time somebody read a poem to you or recited a poem to you? I would be willing to bet that you actually listened to a poem today, that somebody recited poetry maybe on your way to class in your little earbuds. What a lot of us don't realize is that so much of the lyrics that we listen to on our music, on the radio or on our playlist, is poetry. Those lyrics are a poem. Now, I'm not sure how much of that is going to last and be in books for people to study in 100 years. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. For whatever reason, that art was speaking to you enough for you to block out the rest of us and just listen to that. And so as we look at this poem today, or as you look at any poem going forward, I just want you to kind of realize that it could be a song. It could be something that you actually relate to better than you think that you relate to it. Now, usually when we study poetry, we in a full-blown literature class, we would spend a lot of time talking about rhyme scheme, which is the pattern of the rhyming words, or the meter, which is the rhythm of the words, that it's da 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 da, whatever the meter is, and that is a class for the future. That's not really something that we're going to get into today, but I don't think that we have to delve into all of that to really get a lot out of a poem still. When you do that, it gets really exciting, especially if you're a word nerd like me. Things get exciting. But I feel like even just looking at a poem with our skills that we have been developing, we can get a lot out of it. So, but I do think it's important that we understand that that poetry does something different than the other kind of texts that we have looked at. What are some of the differences that you see in poetry versus, say, the newspaper articles that we checked out last week? Okay, so it looks different. It's usually shorter. You're right. The sentences are not always really clear, or they aren't complete. Okay. So that format is really important, that we understand that it's not going to look the way that we might find an article or a story, and that we might have to dig just a little bit deeper to determine what the meaning is and what we think about it. And so the other thing that we have to recognize is that the purpose is different. People don't necessarily write a poem to tell you about yesterday's news. That is not the purpose of poetry. Poetry has a more artistic and deep meaning. People write poetry the way artists paint or musicians create. It comes from a deeper part of their soul, and so that's important to remember, that while we are going to look in this poem today, we are going to look for meaning and context and even storyline. The purpose for a poem is not quite the same, and it is important that we understand that the language is going to be a little different, even in some of our modern poetry, whether it's like a song lyric, like we talked about, or more literary poetry. The language is going to be a little different than you would find in an essay. So just keep those things in mind as we go forward. So we are going to take a look at a very, very famous poem. It's called "O Captain, My Captain," by Walt Whitman. And we're going to read this together. And then I have just a few things that I want you to do in your journals. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about it together. But first, I'm going to read this for us. "O captain, my captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribboned wreath, for you the shores a crowding. For you they call, the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. Here, captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head, it is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored, safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip the victor ship comes in with object won. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Now I want you to just take out your journals, and I just want you to write down your thoughts about this poem. Just right now, what are you thinking? What do you feel? What questions do you have? And that's what I want you to do first. I want you to there's no wrong answer here. All the answers are right if it's genuine and sincere. Just write down those three things: how it made you feel, what your impression is, and what questions do you have. And so I'm just going to give you just a few minutes to go ahead and write that, and then we'll go forward. Now that you've had a few minutes to write down your first impressions of the poems, your thoughts and your feelings, and to go ahead and share them with your table mate, I'd like to get us to get a little deeper into the words and what's actually, all the details of what's on the page. I don't want you to forget that first reaction, that first response. I really believe that our first impression of a poem is kind of the poet's heart talking to our heart. It's soul to soul here. But there's a lot to be found when we start looking at the details. So now we're going to start looking at vocabulary. Maybe there's some words here that we don't quite understand, or words that we don't understand quite how Whitman is using them in this context. Truthfully, this is a poem from the late 1800s. Like, we don't necessarily talk like this anymore. And so it is, it's okay for us to try to figure this out. So I'd like you to highlight at least 3 words that you don't recognize or that you're not quite sure how they're used. The rack, that may be a familiar word to you, but maybe not in this sentence. So go ahead and write down or highlight, 3 words, at least 3, that you don't know the meaning of in this context. And then I want you to write in your journals that word and what you feel like the definition is. Do not open your dictionary at this point. I want you just to look around. What clues are there, and what does this word mean in this context? And as soon as you've finished with that, I'd like you to work again with your table partner and discuss what you found. which words, maybe you both didn't know the same words, or you knew the words that your partner didn't know. And then at this point, you can go ahead and open your dictionaries. Look at the vocabulary words that you didn't know. Look at the dictionary. Now remember, you might have to scroll through some of those definitions in your app to see that, find the definition that really fits right here. And then just talk for just a few minutes about what you find with your vocab. After you finish the vocab, there are a few discussion questions that we have here on the board that I'd like you to work again in partners on. These are just the details. Now, for each of these questions, I do want you to write them in your journal, both of you writing together and discussing. And for every question, I want you to make sure that you find out the why. Each of those questions says, how do you know? Why do you know? And that is the time that you are going to point to a phrase in the poem, kind of an inference based on a definition of a word. Those are the things that I want you to write in your journals. And as you know, I'm going to be checking those weekly. So just go ahead and answer those questions, making sure that you cite the details and work together. And I will be around if you get stuck or if I hear that you're kind of struggling, I'm happy to help. And we'll come back and have a discussion as a class after you have had an opportunity to discuss your vocabulary words and then these context clues and these details from the poem.